Nice.
All right, Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Peace be upon you all. Today, we have a special guest all the way from Australia, Brisbane, human rights activist Drew Pavlou. He has been campaigning for a democratic Hong Kong, for the Uyghur Muslims of his Turkestan, for Tibet. You name it, he's doing it. Also, he's getting a lot of backlash from the Chinese government, from his own university. We've got the man himself today, young 21-year-old Drew Pavlou. How are you doing, mate?
Thank you so much, bro. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really keen to, speak with you. I know you're doing good work, spreading the message about Uyghurs and spreading the message for East Turkestan. Fully back it. So yeah, thanks so much for having me on, man. A lot of my Uyghur friends, they speak very highly of you. And I was talking to my Uyghur friends Ali, Cam, and Arb today, and they were all like, say hello to Aslan for us. So of course, I'm just saying hello for them. That they're big fans, all my Uyghur friends.
Excellent, excellent. Before we get into all that tough political stuff, are you a league man or a union man?
Well, yeah, we discussed this a little bit before. I'm more like a soccer man. The world calls it football, I get, but we Australians, we call it soccer. I've always been a soccer fan, man. Like Liverpool. Been a Liverpool supporter my whole life, so very keen to watch them lift the title this year. Been very difficult because the league's been on pause, but always been a massive football fan. World Cup, love it, yeah.
I was actually born in Liverpool, but in Sydney.
Really?
So what happens is whenever I go and whenever I fill in a form, they're like, which Liverpool, UK, or they get confused.
Oh, right. Very lucky, very lucky.
But anyway, you rocked up a few minutes late today. Could you explain to us where you were?
Oh yes, so I was a little bit late today because I was actually at a rally with my Tibetan, Uyghur, Hong Konger friends in Brisbane, Australia today. We were organising a human rights rally for the Magnitsky Act, trying to get Australian legislators to pass the Magnitsky Act. Basically, the Magnitsky Act is trying to level personal sanctions on the officials who are personally responsible for, the human rights atrocities against Uyghurs, the human rights atrocities against Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Chinese people. The individual officials responsible for operating the Uyghur concentration camps and stuff like that. As things currently stand, they can, shift their wealth offshore. They can buy Australian property. They can have Australian bank accounts. We're trying to push for a Magnitsky Act in Australia so that these people aren't able to act with impunity. These people are punished for their human rights crimes. And it's basically sending a signal, our country, Australia, won't accept people being involved in these terrible atrocities. If you're involved in these terrible atrocities, you won't have access to an Australian bank account. You won't be able to stash your wealth overseas, that sort of thing. Right.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Wow. Okay.
So yeah, we held that today, and my Uyghur brothers and sisters, that they were there, and they were very brave. They made a speech, and it's very difficult for them because in Brisbane, Australia, they're actually targeted by the Chinese government. I have Uyghur friends in Brisbane who, have been followed by the Chinese government, who are followed by the Chinese government in Brisbane, Australia. And it's an attempt to silence people through intimidation, bullying, fear, and stuff like that. I've got, Uyghur friends in Brisbane who, because they've gone to protests in Brisbane, Australia, they've had their family back home visited by Ministry of State security officials, and they've threatened to send their family off to the concentration camps. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation for Uyghurs in Australia. The Chinese government actually uses their families back home as hostages to try and ensure that these people aren't able to speak out even in Australia. So, my Uyghur brothers who came today to the protest and they spoke for East Turkestan and they spoke for Uyghurs, very brave, facing down Chinese government intimidation, surveillance, to speak out freely, to exercise their right as Australians, to speak out freely against these terrible atrocities and crimes.
Well, you've actually been threatened by the, whether it be the Chinese media and even, should I even say the Chinese government to an extent?
Yeah.
But could you explain what's that about? I mean, why would they, as you mentioned, 21-year-old guy going about his studies, why is the Chinese regime, the second most powerful nation in the world, trying to harm you?
Yeah. Well, so I've been named now in official Chinese state media on 4 occasions. They've denounced me in official Chinese state media as a rioter, as anti-China, as a racist, as a separatist. As we all know, separatism is a capital offense in China. It's a crime that they consider worse than murder, rape, pedophilia. It's a crime that is punishable by death. And they've called me a separatist. It all started, I guess, back in July last year. I led a rally on campus for Uyghurs and Hong Kongers. We were basically criticizing our university's very close ties to the Chinese government, while the Chinese government, had these concentration camps for Uyghurs and was persecuting Hong Kongers based on their kind of persecuting Hong Kongers, trying to crush democracy in Hong Kong. We tried to basically have a rally to say that our university should have no ties with the Chinese government while these atrocities are happening. We were calling, for total divestment from the Chinese government until these human rights atrocities were addressed. And supporters of the Chinese government, they sort of surrounded us. They attacked us on campus that day, July 24th, 2019. It was a very small rally. It was a peaceful rally. We had a peaceful sit-in, and we only had 15, 20 people. It was very small, very quiet. And they surrounded us with 200, 300 people. And they assaulted me. They assaulted a number of other Hong Konger students. There were Hong Konger women who had their clothes ripped. There were Hong Kongers who were like choke slammed to the ground, bitten. A security guard was bitten. There were these guys, who came. They weren't students at our college. They were wearing earpieces. They had sunglasses. They had taken steps to conceal their identities. They had masks. We believe, these were operatives of the Chinese government, possibly directed by the consulate. And these people came with the express purpose of trying to, I guess, sow violence on campus and try and, silence people from speaking out for Uyghurs and Hong Kongers by making them terrified and fearful. So I was assaulted on that day, and the next day I was sort of named in Chinese state media, Global Times, and the Consul General in Brisbane, who represents the Chinese government in my state, Queensland, he denounced me as a separatist and endorsed the violent attacks against me. And as a result of this, I received dozens of death threats. My social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, were just flooded with, abusive messages. People threatened to kill me, find my family, come to my house, kill my family, rape my mother, kill my mother, torture my mother. Really horrendous and vile death threats were sent against me because the Chinese Consul General in Brisbane basically denounced me as a separatist and said, he's anti-China. So all these supporters of the Chinese government then sent me death threats and threatened to rape my mother and threatened to kill me and torture my family and stuff. So it was an attempt to, try and bully people into silence. They were trying to, I guess, scare me into being quiet. And I guess, unfortunately for them, had the opposite effect, because when they tried to silence me through fear, my response was, okay, I'm going to be 100 times more vocal in, fighting for Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Chinese citizens against the dictatorship. I basically committed, full-time to activism after they threatened me and attacked me. I was like, okay, I'm going to devote my life to, fighting this dictatorship and fighting for the human rights of all the people that are, oppressed by this dictatorship. And I ran for, and I guess the big difficulty was my university, because, it has probably the closest ties of any Australian university to China. It basically relies on the Chinese state for about 20% of its revenue each year. So 20% of all the revenue at the university comes from Chinese students. And we're talking, this being hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And, over a decade long period, it's basically worth billions to the university. So this is a $1 billion relationship to the university. So my university has basically, rather than, I guess, trying to protect us and trying to protect our freedom of speech, they sort of sided with the Chinese consulate. Consul General Zhu Jie, the guy who denounced me as a separatist and encouraged people to attack me, he was actually appointed as an honorary professor at the University of Queensland, which is just crazy. Wow. So we looked into his background, and his background, he was not an academic. He was not an intellectual. He was a police officer back home in China, and he was a member of the police service. And as we all know, the police are very closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party. He was Chinese Communist Party member and police officer, basically responsible for state security stuff. So, he would have been directly involved in all these human rights atrocities against Uyghurs and stuff like that. And the university actually appointed him to an honorary professorship. They made him a professor at the university. And after he sort of encouraged people to just violently attack me, the university didn't crack down on him. Instead, they actually tried to crack down on me. So they threatened my enrollment for the first time back in July last year, and July last year, and they tried to stop me from holding further protests, and tried to like kind of scare me into stopping my protest activities. I didn't back down. I ran for the university senate, which is, I guess, like, the board that governs the university.
Yeah.
Because I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to be there with the vice chancellor and the chancellor, and basically, fight for the human rights of Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Chinese people, and say, our university should have no ties with this government while it perpetrates these terrible human rights abuses. And I was elected to the university senate, despite the fact that UQ tried to like run a candidate that ran a pro-Chinese campaign against me. They had a candidate run against me, and they had like, posts in Mandarin saying, vote for me to stop Drew's Hong Kong stuff. And because of that, I got more death threats from Chinese students. I was attacked on campus. UQ wasn't successful in stopping me from being elected. I was elected by like, the students. I was elected with a Democratic majority to represent them on the board of the university and to like, campaign on these issues. No more Confucius Institute at UQ. No more Chinese government funded courses. There are 4 courses at UQ that are funded by the Chinese government. And these courses basically, repeat Chinese government propaganda lines. These courses, there's one course in particular, it's called Understanding China. And it's a 3rd year economics course.
Actually, before you get into that, I'm actually going to play the video that you did a few hours ago. I think it was a day ago. And then you can explain why it's important.
We actually face, security. They're hiding behind the door now. And they're hiding a bit over there. But the security, they follow people around campus. They threaten to expel you if you speak out these days. So we want a campus where we can speak out freely. We want our university to have no ties whatsoever with the Chinese government until these human rights atrocities are ended, until the genocide of Uyghurs is ended. No links whatsoever to the Chinese government. The blood-drenched Confucius Institute, handbag. Peter Roy has blood all over his hands. I wonder how he can even look his children, his grandchildren in the eye. We don't care about their money. We care about human lives, human dignity. We want Uyghurs to be free. We want Tibetans to be free. We want democracy for Hong Kong. We want democracy for China. That's why we're here today. We're saying close the Confucius Institute, divest this university. The university must divest from China. Thank you, everyone.
So what does that mean for people who don't understand what a Confucius Institute is? For people that think, oh no, it's just a place where, China is spreading its ancient culture to the world. Could you just touch upon, for the audience who don't know, I mean, what does that mean to have a Confucius Institute linked to a university?
Yeah, sure. So, there are a number of governments around the world who have like sort of, have like cultural institutes that, promote, national culture. So for example, there's the French, they've got like the Alliance Francois institutes and stuff like that. I believe, like it's a quite sort of an ordinary thing for governments to sort of have cultural institutions that promote their culture abroad. That's a normal thing and it's fine. But I guess what is different with Confucius Institutes, the difference is that these are directly controlled by the Chinese dictatorship. They have the express purpose of repeating and propagating Chinese government propaganda lines. They're attached within universities overseas. That's one thing you don't see with, like, I guess, the French cultural institutes and stuff. These are never attached to universities. Instead, the Chinese cultural institutes, the Confucius Institutes, they're attached to universities. And the goal, I guess, is to I guess, like, propagate Chinese propaganda points within a university. So across, I guess, democracies, across the democratic world, so New Zealand, America, Europe, North America, Canada, there are these Confucius Institutes, and they're said to be these kind of benign cultural, like, institutes for the promotion of Chinese culture, but they go much further than just simply the promotion of culture. They actually simply repeat and promote Chinese government propaganda lines. Like when we did an occupation of the Confucius Institute at UQ, we did a protest against it and we occupied it. When we went there, we found, big Mao books. Like, they've got these huge Mao books that they sort of give to their students and stuff like that. These institutes exist for the promotion of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda. And so what they often do is they will act to censor discussion of sensitive topics to the Chinese government on campuses. So, for example, the issue of Taiwan, Confucius Institutes will try and force universities to adopt the Chinese government position. For example, at the University of Queensland, we've got the Confucius Institute there. They forced the University of Queensland to break ties with a Taiwanese film festival because they said it will offend the Chinese government. And it also promotes the Chinese government's, it also promotes the sort of propaganda line of the Chinese government when it comes to Uyghurs and Tibetans. So, for example, there is a Confucius Institute Chinese government funded course at UQ. I was about to go into it. It's called Understanding China. It's a third-year level economics course. And basically, when it gets to the week where they discuss the ongoing detention of Uyghurs in concentration camps, as we all know, 1.5 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, in the largest internment of a people based on their ethnicity since the Holocaust. It's a genocide. When it gets to that week, the course that is funded by the Chinese government that UQ students sit, the course talks about, Uyghur terrorism. It says that the Chinese government's concentration camps are a legitimate anti-terror response to Uyghur terrorism. Again, it gets exactly the Chinese government's propaganda line, because the Chinese government continues to try and say, oh no, this is not a genocide. This is not an attempt to destroy the Uyghur ethnicity or culture. It's simply an attempt, to crack down on terrorism or whatever. We all know that's a lie. But in this Chinese government funded course taught at an Australian university, the University of Queensland, which is supposed to be one of the best universities in Australia, they frame the issue the way the Chinese government frames it, as an anti-terror response. They don't discuss the concentration camps. They call them re-education camps. Again, they basically repeat Chinese government propaganda lines, and this is what students at UQ are taught.
Wow.
It's funded by the Confucius Institute and the Chinese government. So that's the level of, that's how close our universities have become to the Chinese Communist Party. And that's why I guess we protested. That's why we protested the Confucius Institute at UQ. We had these rallies saying our university must divest from it, because I believe if we don't divest from the relationship with China, if we continue having these economic links with China, the blood is on our hands too. We're responsible for the genocide of Uyghurs. We're responsible for the oppression of Tibetans and Hong Kongers and Chinese people. At UQ. At UQ, I guess in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, there was a big movement among students to divest from the relationship with South Africa, because South Africa was run by the apartheid white supremacist government. And, the principle was, we don't want our university being complicit in these terrible human rights atrocities. And I actually now believe it's a very similar principle, in that what the Chinese government has constructed in East Turkestan is an apartheid state. It's a state in which Uyghurs are denied all legal rights, because simply based on ethnicity. And, if we are to be ethical actors, we should have absolutely no relations with a government that operates like an apartheid genocidal system against people based on their religion and their ethnic status. It's simply about, it's a question. Do we want the blood on our hands? I believe, if we don't fight against this and we continue just looking the other way and taking Chinese government blood money while these terrible concentration camps are run, then I believe, we're complicit in the crimes. I believe the blood is on our hands. I won't be able to look my grandchild in the eye and say, we fought against these terrible atrocities. I'll have to tell my grandchildren, if we don't fight against it, I'd have to tell my grandchildren, no, we were cowards. We knew what was happening, but we'd preferred Chinese blood money. I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to do that at all. That's why I fight, because I want to be able to look my grandchildren in the eye and say, we knew what was happening. We fought. We didn't accept it just based on blood money. We didn't sell out these important values. We didn't sell out humanitarianism just for blood money. We didn't care about their money. We cared about human lives, human dignity.
Voices like yours are like a breath of fresh air, because this is exactly one. I don't know what religion you are or what background, but as you mentioned,
I'm Greek, so I'm Greek Orthodox Christian, but I'm not super religious. It's mostly just about humanitarianism, human.
Yeah, the thing is, that's what I want to point out. I
Yeah.
mean, like we have to see that the people that are being locked up, detained, the millions there. It's not about what religion they are, what culture they are. They are human beings,
They're
and
human
human beings need to get on board.
beings.
But we are predominantly Muslim, and it's just sad that we don't see the response from Muslim countries as well. And as you mentioned,
Money.
the
It's money.
the world has come together. For example, the Black Lives Movement, and so they should.
Yeah.
So sometimes we feel, you know what, in America they've got all this democracy. Yes, they have race issues, but you've got millions and millions locked up. We just wish that we had the same amount of energy given towards that. In Australia, we're brought up told that we're the free country, that we're the lucky country. What's been the response? And could you just explain to the audience, UQ, University of Queensland, is a government university, but
Yeah.
is the government able to dictate, or, like in other countries, a government, for example, especially in Asian country, I'm not going to name any countries, but they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. It's what the government says goes, basically. Could you explain the mentality of the Australian government right now? And going about, are they supporting you? Are there certain parties, or is the whole government on board? Is it bipartisan? Yeah.
So I think there are a number of issues that lead into this, and some of them are structural issues, right? So I think part of the problem is, I think since probably sort of like late 70s, early 80s and stuff, across much of the democratic world, we've sort of seen a really huge emphasis on simply just, money, market fundamentalism and stuff like that, the free market and stuff like that. And as a result of that, I think, over time, the Australian government has been contributing less and less to Australian universities. So the University of Queensland, it's a public Australian university. It was founded by the state of Queensland. It's a public university run by the Queensland government. But unfortunately, what has happened, like since the 80s, governments have sort of been giving less and less money to universities, and it's part of like a wider trend in society where there is less government support for, I guess, public institutions and stuff like that. And nowadays, the University of Queensland, only 40% of its revenue is actually tied to the Australian government. So this like so-called public university, more than half of its money comes from outside sources. And so that's why the Chinese government can exploit the situation, because the Chinese government can see that these universities, they're desperate for money. They desperately want Chinese students to make up the gap that whatever gap that they see exists in their funding, because the Australian government is providing less and less. So the Chinese government sees that and it exploits that in a cynical way. It develops very close economic ties to these institutions with the end goal of exercising political influence over them. We now have a situation at the University of Queensland where 20% of the university's revenue is tied to the Chinese market. And what that means is that, yes, the Australian government contributes 40% of the university's revenue. Chinese government contributes 1/5, 20%. It's like it has huge influence now over the university. So what happens then is, because the Chinese government is a totalitarian government and it always tries to link its economic sort of relationships to its political goals, it uses these economic relationships for their own benefit. So as leverage, so they have this leverage over the universities, and they can say, well, if you want to continue to have access to Chinese students, which are now so important to your university's funding model, if you want that 20% of your revenue to continue, well, you're going to have to make sure that you're towing the line on issues of sensitivity to us, whether that be on Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, Uyghurs, democracy in China itself. So, it's funny, like the University of Queensland, it's not afraid to make political stances at times. The University of Queensland, put out statements criticizing Trump's Muslim ban, which I believe was inhumane, and it was the right thing for the university to do, I think, when they criticized that. But they criticized Trump's they criticized Trump's, I guess, Muslim ban in America, and yet there is not a peep from the university when one of their largest trading partners, one of their largest government partners, operates concentration camps in which millions of Muslims are detained based on their religion and ethnicity. There's not a peep. And it's simply because it's simply hypocrisy. It all comes down to the bottom line. They don't actually care about human rights. They don't actually care about, like, you know, the dignity of the human person. They don't believe in values like freedom of religion, freedom of speech. They don't believe in these very important values in democracy. Instead, all they care about is just money. And because Chinese money is so important to the institution, they're willing to sell out anything for it. So now the university is completely silent as one of its major partners, you know, cracks down on Hong Kong, continues to crush culture and people in Tibet, operates concentration camps for Uyghur Muslims. Like, it's horrible because the university sells out these democratic values simply for money. It's blood money.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I want to talk about now. You're actually so. What has UQ done? Have you been expelled, or are you going to be in jail? What's happening?
So we didn't even get up to that point because there's so much, I guess, to get over. But
all the time, if you the time, basically.
Yeah, of course. Well, basically, what happened was I continued my activism. I was elected to the University of Queensland Senate. I was sort of on the same board as the people that run the university, the vice chancellor and the chancellor. The vice chancellor has very close ties to the Chinese government. He was on the board of Hanban, which is the government organization in China that runs Confucius Institutes worldwide. He was on the board of Hanban. He was on it for many years, and he was actually awarded the Most Outstanding Individual of the Year award in 2015 by the Chinese government for his efforts promoting Confucius Institutes. He was actually he was flown to Shanghai, and China's vice premier put a medallion around his neck for his efforts promoting Chinese government propaganda internationally. This is the guy that runs the university, Peter Hui, the vice chancellor. And this is the guy who, you know, this is the guy who sort of directed the expulsion process against me. So yeah, I was elected to the University of Queensland Senate. I was on the same board as him. I was his colleague on the Senate, because when you're on the Senate, you're equal to the vice chancellor. You're all colleagues. That really pissed them off, you know. And I was on the same board as them. And what they did, Peter Hui, I guess, to safeguard the ongoing relationship with China, because I guess he sensed that my protest activities on campus were upsetting the Chinese government and it could threaten the university's economic relationship with the Chinese government. He directed the university to begin the expulsion process against me. So he had, you know, lawyers over many months construct like this 186-page expulsion document against me that listed all these crimes that I had supposedly committed. Do you know Al Capone, the gangster?
Yeah.
Al Capone, the gangster. When he was, when he was finally caught by the American government, do you know what they got him on?
No.
They didn't get him on his, like, you know, gangster. Like, they didn't get him on any of his, like, mobster activities. They didn't get him on being a gangster. They got him on tax evasion charges, right? Yeah. Same principle here. Like, so, like, what the American government did back then to Al Capone in the 30s, they were like, oh, this guy's a gangster. We have to get him in jail. How can we do that? So we started an investigation in search of a crime. And it's the same principle here, you know. So they were like, we have to expel Drew. So start the investigation, go through all this stuff, find things that possibly he's, like, you know, maybe he's done things, maybe he's posted things online that have, like, breached the student charter or whatever. Start an investigation searching for these crimes to try and construct a case to expel him.
So they were basically trying to dig up dirt on you.
Yeah, dig up dirt on me, exactly. So 186-page document, digging up dirt on me. They went through my private Facebook. They screenshotted posts and discussions I had or whatever. They like sort of like they took out the context of a lot of these screenshots, tried to maliciously interpret them in the worst ways possible to make me look like this evil, terrible bully or whatever. The core charge is still related to my activism regarding China. So the core charges, the core reasons they tried to expel me were they tried to expel me for prejudicing the university's reputation. So, like, damaging the university's reputation by supporting Hong Kong and supporting democracy in China. So they were saying that by supporting democracy in China as a UQ senator, I was harming UQ's relationship with China. So that's actually one key reason why they tried to expel me. But they tried to add stuff on top of that to make the case seem like it wasn't just a political sort of thing. They tried to basically pad it out, right? So they basically had an investigation in search of a crime, 186-page document. They would have been going through my stuff for months. It had like stuff as dumb as, oh, Drew used a pen in a campus art shop and didn't pay for the pen. He left it back on the shop. Like literally stuff like that. And I don't even know how they would have had this stuff. They would have had to literally just, been putting me under watch on campus for months to try and actually construct this thing. What I believe has happened is that, yeah, they wanted to expel me to protect their relationship with China. So from there, they then did this months-long investigation trying to make this huge case against me to like get rid of me. And so 186-page document. I was really lucky in that a lawyer agreed to represent me for free. I'm not like someone who's like, particularly wealthy or anything. I'm just sort of like an ordinary sort of Australian. I still have my home with my family and stuff like that. So there's no way.
Question. Are you backed by any terrorist organizations?
Oh, of course. Yes, many. All the many well-known Uyghur ones, all the Tibetan ones. Of course.
I wouldn't be surprised if they cut and snip this, like these few seconds, and use it against you. Let's see what happens.
Like I've been accused by the Chinese government of being like CIA and stuff like that. Like they just like basically like make shit up against you. It's so dumb. It's so stupid. Like, it's so funny. I'm just like, a 21-year-old kid. I live at home. I'm no one special. I'm just a random dude, and like they're trying to be like, oh yeah, Drew, the super secret CIA special, like puppeteered by the CIA, puppeteered by America to destroy China. And it's like, bro, I'm like a 21-year-old. Like I just live at home with my family and dogs. I'm not like, I play video games. I like soccer. I'm not like CIA ultra spy or whatever. I'm not a terrorist as they try and call me. But yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you that psychologically. I mean, you've talked about what you've gone through. Psychologically, how has this affected you? How's it affected mum and dad, your family? I mean, this must take a toll, even though like you're putting up on a brave face, you're sticking it to them. This has a physical, emotional, mental toll.
Yeah, of course. Like the thing is, like, I'm always presenting the brave face and stuff like that because I want to be like tough and like fighting. Like I don't want to like be a pushover against these bullies. But it does take a huge toll on you, right? Because like to be called like a rioter, a terrorist by the Chinese government, to have all these death threats sent against you, to have people threaten your family, to have your university try and expel you to protect the Chinese government. All this stuff, it really does take its toll. Basically, the past 2 months since UQ begun this process trying to expel me, these past 2 months like have just been absolutely, like nonstop sort of like work for me trying to defend myself. And I'm exhausted, because like I've just been doing like I have like all these like sort of interviews I need to do. I'm trying really hard to make my case as public as possible so that people know what the university is trying to do to please the Chinese government. Because I think one of the biggest things in my favor is the fact that the Australian public disagrees with this and really supports me. So I've been trying, to make this public. I've been trying to like be an activist, try and like campaign and stuff like that. And it's exhausting because, I haven't had a day off, in like, I haven't had a day off probably in 6 months. And like, probably have been doing this sort of activism campaign stuff now, like 10 hours a day, every day for like the past now, like 2-3 months since it begun. I really, I enjoy the battle. I enjoy the battle because I love going up against bullies. I love fighting against, these sort of tyrants and these dictators because I know that the battle's just. I know it's about like, justice, human rights, human dignity. So I know that I'm on the right side of history. So, and I have a lot of support. So that part of it keeps me going, but it does take a toll on you because, I can't really lead an ordinary life anymore, like I can't be like, ordinary 21-year-old dude with like, girlfriend and just goes to parties and like just finishes their studies and stuff like that. Like, what are ordinary 21-year-olds doing my age in Brisbane? Like, man, they go to like nightclubs, they're with girls, like they've got like their studies and stuff like that. And meanwhile, I'm fighting like, the nuclear armed superpower that is trying to call me a terrorist and trying to incite people to like send me death threats and stuff like that. It's a pretty crazy situation to find yourself in at just like my young age and stuff. I never really like expected it to happen to like end like this. Cause like when I did that first rally, I never thought that I would be like, doing this long term. I never really like set out trying to be an activist and stuff. It's more like I just did that one protest. They attacked me and then my university attacked me. And then like, I just kept on going because I couldn't back down because it was like, it's about like, like it then lit a fire in me and I had to keep going because it like, it lit a fire in my heart.
Yeah. Well, basically if they had just let you do your bit, it would have been over. It's
Yeah, yeah,
it's
of course.
yeah, it's because they went against you,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
shed light on the issue, and then suddenly you've blown up. But the
yeah,
thing is, even though with all that pressure, you sort of hit back, right?
yeah,
And
of
you're
course.
actually in the process of suing the
Yeah,
university. Are
yes,
you
yes.
able to talk? Like, obviously, you
Yeah,
can't talk about certain
I
things, but
I can talk about it. I can talk about it.
right, okay,
Yeah, so like yesterday, I directed sort of my legal counsel, and I'm really lucky that I've got legal lawyers working for me for free because
yeah,
as I was saying before, I'm just sort of like ordinary 21-year-old dude. I live at home with my family. Like we can't really afford to have this huge $1 million case. That's
yeah,
what UQ was counting on, right? UQ was when UQ did this to me, they were thinking like, oh yeah, Drew's just 21 years old. He can't afford to have this huge legal case. He can't afford to try and he can't afford to go back at us. We'll just bully him into submission, right? What changed for me was that a Queen's Counsel barrister, one of the best lawyers in Australia, Tony Morris, he said to me, I'll represent you for free because I feel so passionate about this cause. I believe you're fighting for free speech and I believe you're being treated unjustly. So one of the best lawyers in Australia agreed to represent me for free, and that's what changed everything. So that's what changed it. That's what turned the situation completely on its head, because it went from UQ thinking, oh, we'll just bully Drew Pavlou into the ground, like he's just a little like bug, we can just squash him. That like when one of the best lawyers in Australia came over and said, I'm going to represent you for free and we're going to fight this, that's what completely changed the situation, and that's what like made this basically a battle, and we're going to win this battle. So yesterday, I directed my legal representatives to file a court case in the Supreme Court of Queensland, seeking $3.5 million in damages against the University of Queensland and the two men that run the University of Queensland and are responsible for the bullying harassment against me, the Chancellor Peter Varghese and the Vice Chancellor Peter Hoy. So we're seeking $3.5 million in damages from the University of Queensland itself, Vice Chancellor Peter Hoy and Peter Varghese.
wow,
And we're seeking these damages because they've breached their contract with me. As a student, I pay my fees, so I have a right to speak out freely on campus. They've acted deceitfully, so that they've actually fabricated. It's come out in the media in Australia. The ABC News, which is our public broadcaster, they did an investigation, and a number of complaints that UQ said were made against me by students. It turned out that these were faked by the university. So we're suing them for deceit, for lying about charges, basically making up charges against me. We're suing them for defamation because they've told the public, and they've gone to the media and they've said we're expelling Drew because he's a bully. We're expelling him to try and protect students from his violence or whatever. And that defamed my image because they tried to present me as a bully or whatever. So we're suing them for basically lying about me in the public and trying to destroy my reputation. We're suing them for harassment. Because they've harassed me and bullied me in this entire campaign, and we're suing them finally for conspiracy, for working with the Chinese government to try and expel me to protect the interests of the Chinese government. So it's a very broad case. We've leveled a number of charges against them. I believe that the Supreme Court of Queensland, when it hears this case, it will decide in our favor. The whole thing so far has been, as UQ's tried to expel me, it's been heard by internal bodies within the university. So, for example, we went to the university disciplinary board, and the disciplinary board is literally run by the university. So, what hope of justice do you have? They're basically just going to do whatever the university wants them to do. And so, we were inside the university, and they just had sort of like a fake kangaroo court. They basically, had this sort of show trial where the disciplinary body basically said that they were doing a fair trial, but instead they were actually basically trying to expel me. Instead they were just doing what the university had told them to do, to expel me. There was no fairness whatsoever. Our whole thing is, once we get this outside of the university, where an independent judge is looking at it, not just someone paid by UQ to do what they want. Once this goes before a proper court, man, not a show trial, when this is heard by a proper court, we believe that a judge will see in our favor. We believe that the judge will see that I've been treated unfairly, that the university has acted unethically in how they've treated me and how they've tried to bully me into silence to protect their relationship with China. I think any reasonable observer, when they look at our case and they look at the details, the fact that UQ faked charges against me, they literally made charges up, they made charges up. The fact that they tried to have sort of like a kangaroo trial, like a sort of fake show trial where in fact it was being heard by just employees of the university, told to do what they were told to told to expel me. The fact that they've defamed my name in the media, the fact that they've attacked me for months now, tried to ruin my mental health, tried to make me like too scared to speak out freely. I believe, and a judge will see this. A judge will see that I've been treated unfairly, unethically. The university's done wrong by me. The university has been, the university has basically acted in a corrupt manner to simply try and protect its ties with China. And in doing so, they've actually, destroyed freedom of speech on campus, which is such an important right in Australia and in our democracy. We believe when it goes to a proper court, not a fake trial, when it goes to a proper court like the Supreme Court of Queensland, they will hear in our favor. We believe, we'll be exonerated. I'll be allowed to continue as a student, and we believe we'll get those damages. And if I do get the damages, I'll make sure that I try and donate as much as possible to Uyghur Muslims, because it's their cause that's so important to me. Like, this is a modern day genocide. It's like a Holocaust with millions of Uyghur Muslims put in concentration camps. And I've got Uyghur brothers and sisters who have dozens of family members in these camps, and I want to fight for them, and I want to fight so that they can see their families again and live in safety with their families. So I'm going to try and donate as much as I can to Uyghurs' human rights.
Do you know if there are any other Drew Pavlows out there that, were fighting for human rights? They may be fighting against China or some other sort of regime, but they weren't lucky as you to have a barrister behind you to get the support. Do you know about, is this widespread within universities, or is it a one-off? Is it a one-off with you, or yeah?
I think what's happened is like there's been sort of an authoritarian creep in society for many years now. And I think we've been building up to this process. There have been other students who've sort of been like harassed by their universities for speaking out on these types of issues. But I think I don't know. I think in Australia, at least, I'm the first student to try and who's been targeted for speaking out against the Chinese government. And that's simply because the Chinese government is worth so much more money these days. It's so much more important to the universities economically. So but it is a wider problem in society. Like at UQ, it's been a problem for some years now that the Vice Chancellor, Peter Hoy, and the university has been sort of trying to crack down on the free speech of academics and students. But normally they're smart enough to try and keep it in the shadows. They don't actually escalate it to a level where the public will see it, the government will see it. They know that if this goes into the media, they look terrible. So they try and do it in a secret way. And then this is the first time, I guess, they stuffed up. They did try to make me keep this secret. So when they first sent me the expulsion document and stuff like that, they made sure it was marked confidential. And they were saying to me, if you talk about this, there may be consequences and stuff. They tried to make sure that I kept this secret. But, I decided this is in the public interest. People must know about this. It's not acceptable. It's not right that a university would try and destroy freedom of speech in Australia to please the Chinese government. It's not right. And I decided, what can they do to me? They're already trying to destroy my life. So what more do I have to lose? All I have to lose, is a degree. But what Australia stands to lose is far greater than that. What Australia stands to lose is, our democratic freedoms. So I'm happy, taking the risks involved in being, I guess, sort of like the kind of test case in a way, because while I might be personally harmed, and while I might, perhaps lose my degree in the end and stuff like that, I think the broader fight to try and ensure that we've got freedom of speech on our campuses and that we have the freedom of speech to speak out against the Chinese government, that's a cause that is so important that I'm willing to, sacrifice things for. And so,
basically what's happened to you is definitely undemocratic, definitely un-Australian. Have there been any political support for you? Any parties, or is it bipartisan?
Yeah, it's actually bipartisan to a huge extent, and that's amazing. That's an amazing thing. So from the left, we've got the Greens, Labor have supported me. We've then got senior officials in the Liberal government. Dan Tian, the Minister for Education. And you've got a number of sort of senators, even right-wing senators, Pauline Hanson and stuff, they even support it. It's basically literally and it's funny, because a lot of what I'm doing is, trying to fight for human rights of Muslims and stuff like that. And in the past, she's been I think she's attacked Muslims and stuff like that. So it's a bit weird when those people support me. Like, but I guess the broader thing is, I guess, just like, you know, everyone in Australia, like, they're like, I don't know.
I want to add something here.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you agree with me, but as you mentioned, like, for example, a lot of the right wing, say Trump supporters, support what
yeah,
I do. They'll share my videos,
yeah,
and
yeah,
as you mentioned, like the likes of Pauline Hanson, you know, in the '90s, she was like very anti, not just China but Chinese as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
which I don't support. But um, it's crazy because the Uyghur issue seems to be one of the main issues that has brought the left, the right, the religious, the non-religious together, which is crazy.
Because it's man, like, I'm pretty sure, like, you know, everyone can see that, you know, concentration camps for people are like disgusting, are atrocious. Sorry, it brings together everyone, you know. On the issue of, you know, like, I guess, like Pauline Hanson and stuff being sort of anti-Chinese in the past, I think it is very, very important that we don't play into Chinese government propaganda that
Yeah,
always tries to say, well, when you criticize the Chinese government, you're being racist against the Chinese people. It's a
exactly.
Chinese government, you know, it's a Chinese government propaganda tactic. It's a trick that they try and use to try and stop people from being able to speak out about what's happening to Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Chinese people. They try and say that, you know, the party and the people are the same. So when you attack the party, you're attacking the people and you're racist. And the Chinese state media call me racist. I think it's very, very important that, you know, we emphasize that we're not against Chinese people themselves. We're against the Chinese government. And the Chinese people themselves, they're our allies in this fight. We want, you know, we want their rights, their democratic freedoms to be eventually respected as well. Like, we want them to have these democratic rights as well. And, you know, to fight this government, we need Chinese people to, you know, see that what's happening to Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, other people in their society is wrong. So we really need to make sure that we're always emphasizing we're not against the Chinese people, we're against the Chinese government. And, you know, in fact, the Chinese people are, you know, our allies in the fight against these terrible abuses, because the only way that we could probably stop these terrible human rights abuses, these concentration camps, is if we if we can get the Chinese people to see this and understand that is terrible and that it can't go on. We need the Chinese people to, like, you know, be on our side with these human rights issues. So we need to make sure that, I guess, we do make it very clear that whatever the Chinese government says, whatever it's propaganda that we're racist and we're against the Chinese people. In fact, we're not against the Chinese people. In fact, you know, I often say this: if you're against the Chinese Communist Party, you're actually pro-China, because you actually, there's no party that's like harmed Chinese lives more than the Chinese Communist Party in history. You know, tens of millions have been killed by this party. So, you know,
Yeah.
we need to make sure we're not anti-China, we're anti-Chinese government. In fact, we want the Chinese government to stand with us fighting against these human rights abuses.
Well, this interview has gone quite smoothly. I've given you pretty much softball questions. I'm going to throw a hard one at you.
Yeah, sure.
Now, obviously, you know, we're concerned and we support the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
You went on, said on Twitter that there were similarities with the Black Lives Matter movement and what's happening in Hong Kong. And you kind of got backlash from some people, and you even mentioned yourself you lost followers and all this. Could you,
I lost 1,000 followers.
Basically explain yourself? Why you went? What were your intentions in saying that?
I want to explain. So, you know, what the core principle that drives a lot of my activism, right, is the belief that all human beings are born equal in dignity, value, and worth. So regardless of ethnicity, regardless of culture, regardless of borders or whatever, all human beings, their lives are valuable and need to be protected. And so, like, that's why, you know, I support efforts to, like, you know, improve the situation for African Americans in America, especially when it comes to, like, you know, police brutality and, like, the poverty and that goes on. Human beings need to have their lives respected and valued and, like, treated with dignity. You know, like, it's a humanitarian issue. I think like, when we say Black Lives Matter, we're simply trying to say, you know, it's unacceptable that in this society, African American men are too often, you know, just killed for no reason by police, or African Americans are sort of, like, kept in poverty in a way that is far disproportionate to the ordinary population, stuff like that. We're trying to say that, you know, lives need to be valued and respected and treated with dignity by this society and this government. And so it's a humanitarian thing. And then it's those humanitarian principles that lead me to my fight against the Chinese government and my fight for Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Chinese people, because the belief is that all human beings are created with all human beings possess equal worth, value, dignity, and therefore it doesn't matter that these concentration camps are halfway around across the world. It's still something we must care about. It's still something that we must fight against, because these are human beings just like ourselves. They want the same things as us. They want to be able to live freely. They want the ability to just simply live safe and secure lives in freedom with their families and friends. They want fundamentally, all human beings, I think fundamentally, want to be free of persecution and torture and unjust persecution, things like that. And so
I definitely see that the way that the Chinese Communist Party has dealt with the CCP virus, that the world has woken up, because if they definitely don't even forget caring about the citizens in China. They don't care about anybody, and we've seen
fundamentally. Bro, how many people did they sacrifice in China to try and contain the virus? Who believes the official statistics when there were videos of people welded into their own homes and stuff like that? This is a government that just fundamentally does not respect human life and does not treat human life with any value, and it believes that human life has absolutely no worth. All it believes in is trying to preserve its own power. And so I believe we must fight for the human rights of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers. And I also believe we need to fight for the human rights of, say, Indigenous Australians in Australia. Indigenous Australians face terrible rates of poverty and police violence and terrible discrimination still. And in African Americans in America, they face discrimination and they face poverty and violence on rates that are just completely unacceptable, and they're treated they often treated inhumanely. I believe fundamentally it's just we want to treat human beings with dignity. And you see another human person, that's my brother, that's my sister. We're all one. Every life has its equal value and worth. So that's why we're trying to fight to protect the equal value and worth of every human being. And I think unfortunately, sometimes people and I believe truly that has to be a universal thing. I believe you can't just stop that when it's a little bit uncomfortable in my society, for example. So, for example, in Australia, a lot of sort of conservatives really support the fact that I am an activist against the Chinese government and its human rights abuses. But when I sort of raise points about our own human rights record in Australia and stuff like that, these same people are often the first to attack me. And I believe that's just such a fundamental mistake, because if we are to have any credibility when we criticize the Chinese government's actions and its human rights abuses,
are you trying to say all lives matter?
Well, I believe no. What I fundamentally believe is that every life is equally valuable and needs to be protected. And so, and I guess that sometimes all lives matter. People respond to the phrase Black Lives Matter with all lives matter and stuff. I think, of course, all lives matter, but I think I think unfortunately though, unfortunately people make the mistake that when they think that when people say Black Lives Matter, they're saying matter more than white lives or anything. But in fact, what Lives Matter is just, it's trying to say that African Americans or Indigenous Australians, they're our brothers and sisters in humanity. Their lives need to be protected and treated with dignity and respect. That's simply what that phrase means, and that's what I'm fighting for. And I believe, if we are to have any credibility fighting against the Chinese government's human rights abuses, then we need to treat this as a universal issue. Treat these humanitarian problems as a universal issue. We can't we can't just be quiet when these human rights abuses occur in a country we like or support, because then the Chinese government, then it has the ability to in its propaganda say, well, you're just anti-China, you don't care about, say, the human rights abuses here. In fact, but what we want to be able to say is well, no, we actually do care about the human rights abuses here, and we care about the human rights abuses in China, because we believe in human rights everywhere, universally. It's, part of it is having the credibility to try and actually, like, it counters Chinese government propaganda. The Chinese government propaganda always tries to claim that, like, these people that talk about human rights, in fact, they've actually just got the ulterior motive of attacking China, and they're just sort of like these kind of frothing at the mouth, crazy anti-China people. And what we want to show is, like, no, that's just stupid propaganda. That means nothing. In fact, we believe in human rights here in Australia too. We believe in human rights in America too. We believe in human rights wherever they're being, like, wherever they're being attacked, or wherever human beings are being devalued in their life and stuff like that. We're trying to be, we build up our credibility by trying to fight these issues in a universal way. We don't ignore one in order to, like, we can't ignore one. So that's why I support these issues. I think that they are interlinked. And I fundamentally believe, if these movements, like, work together, like Black Lives Matter and Hong Kongers and stuff like that, and Uyghurs and Tibetans, if all the people of the world who are treated unfairly work together, then, the powerful, like they will fall. The powerful are very, very scared of solidarity. The powerful always want to distract us by, like, by dividing us up based on race, class, nationality, or whatever. What they really are fearful of is like the groups that have been treated unfairly working together as one, like recognizing the universal nature of their struggle and fighting together against, like, these injustices. Like, bro, they're very scared of us breaking our chains and working together. And so I fundamentally, I fundamentally believe, like, let's work together, try and fight these issues in a universal way. I know, like, a lot of people try and say it's like violent, it's looting. I'm a non-violent protester, and I support peaceful means. Fundamentally, I just want, I guess, like, all people who are fighting against injustice to work together, because I believe we're stronger together than we are divided. Like, the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party wants us to be divided and squabbling amongst each other, and, like, having petty fights with one another about, like, such and such and such and such, so that we can't be unified in the struggle. If Black Lives Matter works together with Tibetans and Uyghurs and Hong Kongers and ordinary Chinese people and, like, Indigenous Australians and Australians here and Europeans, and, we all fight together. And the Chinese government and, human rights abusers across the world, they will fear that, and we will ultimately win. That's what I believe. I believe ultimately, history is on our side, man, and we're going to win.
Look, you're an activist now. With all this going on, do we see, am I looking at a future MP? Like, what's going on? Do you want a life in politics? Or this is going to be my last question, because we've had you on for an hour. You've just come from protest, but last question, what's the future for Drew Pavlou?
I just want to devote my entire life to these issues, bro. Like, my entire life, my dream is to live to 100. I'm 21 now, so I have 79 more years. And my dream is that constantly I will always be trying to fight for, like, human dignity, human justice, human rights, trying to fight against injustice wherever it's occurring, fight with my Uyghur brothers and sisters, my Tibetan, Hong Konger brothers and sisters, my Chinese brothers and sisters against this injustice. I believe, ultimately the Chinese Communist Party, it won't be able to continue these injustices. I believe ultimately they're going to fall. And I believe, governments that perpetrate these injustices anywhere across the world, they will fall. When we work together, people power. It's so strong, man. So my dream is that we work together, and my dream is to devote my entire life to this cause and this struggle, and try as much as I can to, like, fight for human dignity and human justice and human rights. And my dream is that one day, like, we'll all have freedom and we'll all be able to, like, live lives freely with our families and friends. I was really lucky, to be born as an Australian, man, because, just by being born as an Australian, I had all these sort of advantages in life, because, I didn't have a government that, like, would, knock on my door at midnight and whisk me away to a concentration camp. I didn't have, like, I didn't have, like, the threat of torture and state-sanctioned murder hanging over my head and stuff like that. I was really lucky in that I was just sort of, like, born into, like, that sort of fortunate situation. And I just don't want to stop fighting until everyone has those same, like, freedoms that I enjoy personally. Like, I don't want anyone anywhere to, like, fear persecution from their state, fear persecution based on their religious beliefs, their political beliefs. I don't want anyone to ever fear the torture of the state or the state sending murderers after them. I want people to live with freedom and dignity. That's what I want to fight for. That's what I want to devote my entire life towards. You know, we'll stick together, man, and everyone. Hopefully, we fight together. And man, I believe, you know, by the time we're 100, we'll both be 100, and we'll see this freedom, and we'll know that the struggle was worth it.
Okay, so the last thing I basically want to leave with the audience is basically where we can support you. So you've got a link on your Facebook page. It's here. Sorry, Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's like this link tree with a bunch of links. Could you just explain?
Yeah, sure. So like if you click on the link, like it'll like take you to like my social media profiles. So, you know, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you want to like sort of like follow what I'm up to and like try and like work with me, and like I really want to build this into a movement, you know, please follow me and please, like, you know, keep up to date through that way. So I've got my social media there, and on as well as that, on my link, I've got like links to a fundraiser we're doing for Amnesty International to try and provide like for Amnesty International to work to, you know, support human rights in China, to support human rights for Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers. So I've got a link to a fundraiser there for human rights work. And there's also a link to a petition I've got there. Someone made a petition against my expulsion. So, you know, if you can, please sign the petition, because the more signatures, the more powerful it is. So yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Are there any last comments before I let you go, Drew?
No, I just want to thank you so much for having me on, man, and like listening to my ravings and whatnot. And bro, we'll stay in touch. We'll keep on fighting, you know, for Uyghur freedom together, and, you know, Tibetan freedom, Hong Konger freedom. We'll stick together, trying to, you know, fight for justice. I truly believe, like, you know, history is on our side, and we'll one day see, you know, our goals reached. We'll see, like, you know, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, ordinary Chinese people, Uyghurs, we'll see them be able to live with freedom and dignity. So that's what we're fighting for. And thanks so much for, you know, having me on, and let's stick together. We're comrades in this battle, man.
Yeah, so basically what Drew was talking about is the future of this map, right? Can you guys see this map? So basically we've got, you know, Chinese occupied East Turkestan labeled, Chinese occupied Tibet.
I support, I support the right to self-determination. That's all I'm going to say. But the Global Times will say Drew's a separatist, Drew's this and that, a terrorist trying to destroy China. Yeah. Look, I support the right of people to self-determination. Yeah. I believe, you know, it's probably the case that Tibetans, Uyghurs probably will never be free until they've got their own independent country. Yeah. I support an independent Tibet. I support an independent Turkestan. I support an independent Hong Kong. What are you going to do? Yeah. Chinese government can piss it. The Chinese government can, you know, like have a massive sook about that. They can have a big cry. Maybe they can write up a big, like, big Global Times exposés about like Drew the separatist or whatever. I support independence for oppressed peoples. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Okay, guys. I want to thank you. You just come from a protest. You know, get your coffee and get your Red Bull in. The reason why I had it, I had it a bit earlier. I thought Friday night, this guy's going to go out, but you just told us that's not your life anymore. So that's
my life. Well, bro, I'm just full on activist, you know, because you know, struggle for justice. That's more important than like nightclubs and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you for everyone joining us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Make sure you share our stuff. By all means, you know, download it, do what you want to it. I'm sure the Chinese government are going to snip that little bit where you then announce to the world that you're a terrorist. So that's cool.
Beautiful, beautiful. You beauty.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.